Welcome to the Fairgrounds interview. I'm your host, Jim Mulvihill. Our guest today is Tony Bentley, who's about to embark on his fifth season as the Fairgrounds quarter horse announcer. But before that, he was the thoroughbred announcer here for 27 years up until 2001. Lately, he's been embarking on a film career that actually has gotten to be quite successful. We'll get to all that in this three-part series, but first we're going to start with quarter horse racing. Tony's called thousands of thoroughbred races, hundreds of steeplechase events. Tony, how is calling quarter horse racing different from those?
Well, actually, I don't know how the other announcers do it, but I figure it's if I mention the winner, that's good, and B, if I actually call the winner in front, that's huge.
That's all it is. That's a success.
Right. I mean, there's not a lot of time to editorialize about what's happening. Although the one day I did do if you remember, I did a Trevor Denman quarter horse race. Away they go. And the grueling pace, the first 10 feet went in 0.28, and they'll never keep it. And the winner is! But that was just for fun. So, but seriously, people are betting their money. People own these horses. They ride these horses. And you just do the best you can.
Yeah.
I had done some quarter horse races periodically over the years at different places, but and they come right at you.
Is it more or less difficult preparing for it? I mean, you're not going to get through the whole field, but you also only have those few seconds.
Yeah, let's be honest. The post position silks, that's a big help. And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they had the big Champions Day, I believe they were owners' colors.
Yeah.
And I just went up and blessed John and wished him good luck because, but anyway, so you know your post position colors, and you make sure you got the right race and all of that, and so on and so forth, and here they come, and it's surprisingly there aren't as many problems other than like the loading process where one flips or whatever, but there aren't as many horrible starts as you would think there would. But would you agree or not? I mean, there are very few foul claims. So I don't really end up saying, and he got away poorly, and it may be because you don't really have time.
Yeah.
Because you're like, okay, who's coming where and whatever. So.
Well, you mentioned Champions Day, so obviously you had called quarter horses before. Where else had you called quarter horses aside from that?
A couple at Canterbury Downs. And actually that was it, because then we used to, Champions Day we would have, and then they'd have the trials here for Mardi Gras and stuff like that. So I had done them. But.
Well, hopefully this year the AC will be working. I remember that the first time I ever saw you calling a quarter horse race, I wandered up to the press box and you were in there shirtless.
Well,
I was like, oh, there's half naked Tony Bentley.
But that actually brings back a great Fairgrounds tradition, because before the fire, we actually walked up steps out onto a roof, and then I went into my little booth. So many's the time on a beautiful March day in between races, just go out, take the shirt off, get some sun while looking at the skyline of downtown New Orleans. So this was an old tradition coming back.
That's great.
Right.
Well, let's talk about some of your older days at Fairgrounds. I want to ask how you first got to be a track announcer, and then how that led to Fairgrounds.
We'll get through this quickly. Obnoxious kid growing up in St. Louis. I was the jerk that always was the announcer when you were playing wiffle ball. Bottom of the eighth, Cardinals trail by 3 on deck for the Pirates. Clemente, Stargell, and they better get something going or it's all over for the Buccos, whatever. So I would do that, and then I started going to the racetrack, Cahokia Downs and Fairmount Park. You had to really like racing to get caught in traffic in East St. Louis trying to get to Cahokia Downs when the train stopped and you're going, oh my God. But anyway, and Dave Johnson was the announcer. So what a role model. He's the first announcer I ever heard. And I don't care what you say, in those days before simulcasting, everyone thought the announcer at their track was the best announcer in the world. Sure. So I would mimic Dave Johnson. I'd go to high school or whatever, and I'd in study hall or whatever, and I'd just go, post time in 5 minutes. People would go, what are you, nuts or whatever? So I would just do stupid stuff like that. But then, let me see, it was 1972, and I went to Europe and did a backpack thing, came back, stayed in New York, saw Dave on television, who was Capocella's assistant for his Cappy's last year, so they would have been 72. They were doing a TV show, and I said, gosh, that's Dave Johnson, the guy that used to be in St. Louis, so I wrote him a fan letter. Always was a fan of yours and glad you're in New York, and which he returned. He tracked down my brother's address, who was living in Soho at the time.
Wow.
And I went out to the track and I met him, and he said, well, here's what, I said, how'd you get into this? And he told me. So I went back home. I was in hotel and restaurant school, but whenever I could, I would slip over to the track with my colored pens and my little cassette recorder and get in a kind of a place where nobody was and go, they're off. On the outside, that's, all right, click. Better look at him a little more carefully.
That's what you got to do, though.
Right. And I would send him the tapes. He listened, and he hooked me up with John Shoemaker, who was the president of Penn National Racetrack. They had opened in '72. They were, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was the first announcer there. He went on to Louisiana Downs, a big, tall, thin guy. I can't think of the name now. But anyway, he wasn't going back, so I started in February of 1973 at Penn National, where they ran 10 races a day, 250 racing days. That's 2,500. And as we were talking before, I started to do the math, and I think I'm over 86,000 horse races.
And you remember every one of them?
Every one of them, and most of them were correct. We all have those days where you called a horse in the 8th race who already ran in the 3rd race. You know, these things happen.
Well, and so then how does this lead to Fairgrounds? How did you eventually end up here?
So, let me see. Summer of '74, I was double dipping doing Timonium, the Maryland State Fair, and Penn National, but kept in touch with Dave Johnson, who was good friends with Francis Dunn, a jockey club steward who was a steward here at the time and also in New York. And the Fairgrounds was looking to replace their announcer, so he put me in touch with Jack Letelier, and I did tapes and whatever, and came down, interviewed, and got the job, not knowing what I would do in the summer, although I knew I could probably go back to Timonium, but they only ran 40 days. But then during the time I was here, Austin Brown contacted me for Delaware Park, and because Bill Phillips of the Racing Forum knew me from Timonium, and Maryland was going year-round, Delaware needed an announcer. So I do remember, of course, I guess the statute of limitations, as Yogi Berra would say, has run out, but Mr. Brown called me, and it came through like 1 minute to post. He said, well, Tony, listen, you know, I'd love to hear your work and whatever. I said, well, hang on. I'm sure breaking every law in the books at the time. But so I just left the phone off the hook. He says, well, gee, that sounds great. He said, well, let's talk. Well, anyway, so I got the job at Delaware Park, and so I was here for 1974 till 2001, and my summer jobs were Delaware Park for 7 years, then 1 year at Arlington Park. I did the million there. That was a great thrill. And then Canterbury Downs, which closed in '92 and then reopened. And that was actually my last summer racetrack. So for 31 years, I left New Orleans every summer, and now I know how lucky I was.
No kidding.
No, I know.
So your first day at Fairgrounds then would have been Thanksgiving
Day, 1974.
Do you actually remember anything specific about that day?
My car got broken into in the parking lot.
Oh, that's a perfect introduction to New Orleans.
Yeah, well, but I mean, nothing personal. You know, I do remember, but and I don't remember if they took anything. But actually, I do remember something. This was crazy. There was an insurance problem with the jockeys, so
that happens now and then.
Yes, and who was going to cover da 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 da, and there was an ongoing. So a lot of riders, there was no name in the program. It was blank because they didn't know who they were going to do. So now I'm here, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm going, and the jockey is the hell you say, and number 5 make the rider E.J. Perodin, and I'm just, you know, butchering it. And I tried, but there was, you know, in 12-horse field, there was only 3 riders named. So I do remember that was kind of a strange welcome to New Orleans, but I did get over it. And so lasted for a while.
Well, we'll get to Tony's time at Fairgrounds here a little bit more in part 2. Stay tuned.